Welcome everyone to the first Paul's Tech News of 2022. I missed you guys, but it's a good thing I'm back because CES was this week and tech companies were throwing all manner of gadgets at the wall to see what would stick. It's my messy job to scrape away the remains and let you know if anything worthwhile was revealed, but don't get your hopes up. Scores of big name companies didn't even attend, pulling out at the last minute like your dad should have done. And there's much uncertainty and instability in the tech world right now due to those damned global shortages. Nevertheless, CES plowed ahead, like what your dad actually did, and now, like it or not, we here at home have to deal with the consequences. As opposed to actual CES attendees, they just have to deal with Omicron. Happy New Year.
Excellent!
Today's video is brought to you by Corsair's new Xeneon monitor, the 32QHD165, featuring an ultra-slim 32-inch 2560 by 1440 QHD screen with 1 millisecond moving picture response time, a 165Hz refresh rate fast IPS panel, quantum dot technology, and 100% sRGB, 100% Adobe RGB, and 98% DCI-P3 color gamut coverage for more vivid natural colors, HDR400 support, and convenient features like the integrated multi-mount point for cameras, mics, or lighting built into the stand to round out the package. So for more on Corsair's Xeneon monitor, click the sponsor link in the video description. In case you missed it, I did cover the big three keynotes already in a dedicated video. AMD, NVIDIA, and Intel kicked off CES 2022 with a slew of new product announcements, some better received than others, and I'd say the biggest winners for this event would be laptop users who can look forward to a wealth of Intel 12th Gen and AMD Ryzen 6000 series mobile CPUs launching in the next month or two. My biggest disappointment was definitely the lack of any solid information on Intel's Arc GPUs, which have versions coming in both desktop and mobile trim, but when Intel got to that part of their presentation, they just said units are shipping to OEMs, and they vaguely referenced a bunch of different PC integrations that their partners have planned. Not even a model name or number was disclosed, and to further the impression that Intel's push into the gaming GPU market is going to maybe take a little bit longer than expected, videocards.com discovered Thursday that all references to Q1, or first quarter, on the Intel Arc website have been removed. It now just says 2022, which is a much longer span of time than just Q1. This raises questions as to why Intel would do this, and it happened in multiple spots on their site, so clearly it was intentional. And if even the promise that they reinforced in their keynote that Arc would be coming in Q1 is possibly in the process of being pushed back. It's a disappointing development given how hungry the PC gaming crowd is for alternative GPU solutions right now, but hopefully Intel's Arc curves back towards punctuality soon. Another Intel announcement that received limited airtime was the new H670, B660, and H610 chipsets for 12th Gen Alder Lake desktop CPUs, a welcome addition to the LGA 1700 fold, as all those non-K-SKU CPUs that they announced Tuesday would be a bit wasted on a Z690 motherboard since they're locked for overclocking. The happy news here is that Intel extended memory overclocking, meaning you can plug in your memory's XMP profile to all chipsets except the super budget H610, which you probably weren't considering anyway. This means H670 should be a viable alternative to B550 class boards on the AMD side though, even without CPU overclocking support, and B660 might save a few more dollars for PC users who don't need a lot of I/O, as the main difference between B660 and H670 is half the DMI lanes, 4 instead of 8, and those are muxed out to provide SATA, USB, and PCI Express connectivity, generally speaking, and it might be a different configuration depending on the motherboard you're looking at. B660 does lack RAID support though, which might be a factor for some. Motherboard vendors all announced way too many motherboards featuring these chipsets to go over here, but the upshot is that we should all probably thank AMD for making B550 such a competitive offering that Intel had no choice but to beef up their mid-tier chipsets to compete. Speaking of AMD, they had some good announcements too, even if my main takeaway was that the 3D V-Cache CPUs that they talked about so much in 2021 were limited to one SKU, the 5800X 3D, that might not even launch until June. The product that deserves a follow-up look though is the Radeon RX 6500 XT that they showed off, a $200 desktop graphics card that's launching in about a week and a half on June 19th. It's a strange indication of the times we're living in right now when it comes to GPUs that the 6500 XT's shortcomings might actually be its strongest selling points. It's a 1080p focused card with only 4 GB of VRAM, and while that's not a lot for a card launching in 2022, it means the 6500 XT simply can't be used to directly mine Ethereum. The current DAG size for ETH mining is about 4.6 GB, and that data needs to be loaded into your GPU's VRAM to mine, so 4 GB cards and below are a no-go. And since we all know by now what is causing the high GPU prices, they correlate directly with crypto mining profitability, AMD's hope is that the 6500 XT will not appeal to crypto miners while still providing a good enough gaming experience for PC gamers on the hunt for a GPU. So are the 6500 XT's deficiencies actually selling points? ASRock has even revealed that it runs on a PCI Express Gen 4x4 interface, providing 8 GB per second of bandwidth, or the same amount as a PCIe 3.0x8 connection, or a full PCIe 2.0x16 slot. I'd like to see a sizzle reel advertising all these features as if they're breakthroughs though. Only 4 gigs of VRAM on a 64-bit bus. No hardware AV1 decoder or H.265 encoder, who needs those? And for PCI Express 3.0 users, no resizable bar support, and even less bandwidth. It's truly a mixed bag, and it's hard to say how things will shake out, but just to reality check, I looked at current GPU prices, and even 4GB GTX 1650s that should sell for $150 MSRP are going for $350 or more. So hopefully the 6500 XT is horrible enough that it doesn't suck in that way too. I'm fairly confused here, but one more tidbit from AMD that came out as a follow-up to their Socket AM5 announcements. And Socket AM5 is the new platform launching later in 2022 for Zen 4 Ryzen 7000 series CPUs with the LGA 1718 socket, DDR5, and PCI Express 5.0 support. And that was a welcome statement from CEO Lisa Su about platform longevity. When Ryzen first launched in 2017, AMD boldly claimed that they would be using the AM4 platform until 2020, at least, and they followed through on that promise, even if it led to some confusing CPU support issues with older 300 series chipsets and newer 5000 series CPUs. The AM5 platform will also be long-lived, Sue said in an interview with Tom's Hardware, and while she didn't say a year or a date specifically that it would be long-lived until, her words were, "You should expect that AM5 will be a long-lived platform as AM4 has been." Now that phrasing leaves them wiggle room, of course, as all hedged promises made by big tech companies usually do, but it's good to know that this is at least their stated plan, and that sticking with AM4 for so long was seen as a good move from a business perspective. It's certainly popular with consumers, and one of the reasons that I took to the original Ryzen AM4 platform myself, even earlier on before it was proven. Hopefully, the same will go for LGA 1718. NVIDIA's presentation, meanwhile, provided more meme fodder than anything else, and as I and others pointed out, the 1 minute or so of airtime that they gave to their actual new GPUs seemed indicative of how they feel about their PC gaming customers right now. The $250 RTX 3050 that was announced isn't nearly horrible enough to compete with the RX 6500 though. See what I did there? I mean, it has an 8GB VRAM setup, and so it will likely see the same scalping and reselling treatment that has plagued the industry for the past 1 to 2 years. We can still at least ogle the RTX 3090 Ti, or 3090 Ti, or whatever they want it to be called though, because if a 3090 was already out of your league, then dressing it up with a Ti and probably even more ridiculous selling price probably won't make much difference to you. NVIDIA didn't do much beyond holding up a Founders Edition card to show that it exists, but info from EVGA has now trickled out about the Kingpin RTX 3090 Ti that's in the final stages of development. Originating on the Quasar Zone forums, the rumors state that the 3090 Ti Kingpin won't be compatible with the existing 3090 Kingpin water block, likely due to an updated memory layout since the new card will use 2GB GDDR6X modules, so it won't need to put any of those on the back of the PCB. It will also use two 12-pin power connectors, the new PCI Express 5.0 ones, which should provide up to 1,275 watts of power for the card. That's a big bump up from the 525 watts you get from a triple 8-pin power connector setup that is common with high-end cards today. That doesn't mean that the 3090 Ti Kingpin's board power will actually be that high, but it does mean EVGA is providing a lot of overhead wattage beyond the NVIDIA specs. Still no word on pricing, although the 3090 Ti is still rumored to launch January 27th. NVIDIA didn't confirm that date though, because they don't owe you or me anything. They're probably too busy selling pallets of Founders Edition cards to crypto mining operations, and you should be grateful that they're even still talking about gaming GPUs at all. One thing that did stand out amongst the CES announcements to me was the proliferation of gaming monitors and displays. This was one of the things that NVIDIA used to distract us from how much they hate selling GPUs to individual gamers now, because just look at all these 1440 esports displays with up to 360 Hz refresh rates that you wish you had a good GPU to connect to. I'm supposed to be positive about this though, so I will say that 27-inch 1440p has been a very solid bang for the buck size and resolution combo for a gaming PC for some time, and adding features like higher refresh rates in the 240 to 360 Hz range as well as NVIDIA Reflex support, is a good thing, as long as the prices aren't too unreasonable. NVIDIA showed models from AOC, MSI, Asus, and Viewsonic, and the MSI, Viewsonic, and AOC 300Hz variants even use mini LED backlights for 500 zone local dimming and HDR 1000 support. The MSI MEG271Q, for example, sports G-Sync Ultimate compatibility, a rapid IPS panel with up to 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time, and even pretty good color reproduction with 97% DCI-P3 coverage. Of course, pricing and availability dates for all these monitors remains a mystery. Hopefully the G-Sync markup isn't too steep. Viewsonic also showed off their beastly Elite XG321UG display, a 32-inch 4K 144Hz panel that does have a price, $2,500 US, which is steep, but there's a laundry list of features included. An IPS panel with 1152 zone mini LED backlighting, HDR 1400 support, G-Sync Ultimate, at least 95% DCI-P3 and 99% sRGB coverage, a bit of RGB lighting on the back, and Q1 availability. The only drawback is connectivity, as Viewsonic only decided to provide 3 HDMI 2.0 ports, not 2.1, although I guess they can call it 2.1 now, but those can't handle full subsampling for HDR at 4K, meaning the single DisplayPort 1.4a plug is the one that you'll want to use. Dell arrived to the party with their Alienware AW3423DW, a 34-inch 3440 by 1440 ultra-wide with a qd-oled panel. That's OLED with quantum dots and a nice 175Hz refresh rate. It's got a pretty cool chassis design with a white rear panel, RGB lighting, and the Alienware logo, an 1800R curve, and OLED tech means amazing contrast ratio, 99.3% of DCI-P3 coverage, true blacks, and an astounding 0.1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. HDR 1000 and G-Sync Ultimate support round out the package, and it should be available March 2nd in China, March 29th in North America, and April 5th elsewhere, although pricing is still not disclosed. Although not quite as gaming-oriented, Dell also debuted their new ultra-sharp 32-inch 4K video conferencing monitor, shipping in March with an IPS panel, HDR 400 and 100% sRGB coverage, but also with bonus dock-like features that would be great for connecting a laptop, an integrated 4K webcam that can do auto picture-in-picture, a USB-C port with DisplayPort 1.4a, and a host of added I/O, including 90 watts of power delivery that could charge a Mac Pro, and a question mark for the moment as to whether this is accomplished via Thunderbolt or standard USB. Laptop users with less than adequate docks or horrible built-in cameras might keep an eye out for the launch on March 29th, but again, no pricing for now. Are there more displays even? Yes. LG is next with the 42-inch version of their C2 OLED TV lineup. This is the successor to the C1 and a size that's probably big for desktop use, but not too big, at least not as hard to fit as the previous 48-inch panel that some employed as a monitor for that sweet, sweet OLED panel goodness. It's a 4K panel with 120Hz variable refresh rate, auto low latency mode, HDR, and true HDMI 2.1 48 gigabits per second connectivity, but availability is still murky and only listed as spring 2022, with no pricing yet, although TechRadar seems optimistic that the 42-inch C2 might cost around $1,000. Okay, just a couple more displays to talk about from Samsung. First, the one you probably already saw was the Odyssey Arc 55-inch, a huge 4K display designed for gaming with a 1000R curve and the ability to rotate 90 degrees and display multiple inputs at the same time. The included dial allows you to control what's on screen and swap between, say, a 32:9 ultra widescreen across the bottom half with two 16:9 displays up on top, or you can rotate the whole thing to get a sort of awkwardly tall display that can do 3 stacked pictures, which might be good for streaming setups or multitasking depending on how much neck strain you can handle. So the Arc was cool, but perhaps a bit large for desktop use, so I'll finish with the mysterious Samsung Odyssey G8QNB. Mysterious because it won a CES Innovation Award, but Samsung never seemed to bother showing it to anyone at the event. There's a single picture of the display, and specs that would indicate this is using the same panel as the aforementioned Dell Alienware AW3423DW, a 34-inch 3440 by 1440 ultra-wide quantum dot OLED panel, 175Hz refresh rate, 0.1 millisecond response time, and an 1800R curve. Very nice specs all around, and I'm excited for more OLED monitors available for desktop gaming, but we'll have to keep an eye on this one to see why Samsung didn't draw more attention to it at CES. Thus endeth my rundown of all the cool displays at the event, and I didn't even make a joke about all these companies showing off their New Year's resolutions. Trying to keep things classy in 2022, so let's move on. Tech briefs are what you really came here for though, this I know, and what better place to round up a few more quick CES and non-CES stories for this week. CES honorable mentions include this concept chassis from CyberPower, dubbed the Breathing Kinetic Series PC, which has 18 ventilation panels that open and close like a psychedelic honeycomb to increase airflow or reduce system noise. This certainly isn't the first time a chassis has been made with active airflow panels, but it's a unique implementation with screw drive mechanics for the panels to keep them smooth and low profile. Every 5 seconds, it samples temps and opens the panels if your system's air is hotter than 70 degrees Celsius. If you dig the aesthetics, the case should be available in Q3 for around $250. BMW covered their new iX Flow concept car with e-ink panels to create these cool monochromatic color-changing effects. And visually, this is just really cool looking, as well as even somewhat functional. E-ink uses very little power, and the car could turn white on hot days to keep the interior cool, or black on cold days to absorb more heat. It could also flash the whole car's color if you've lost it in a parking lot and you're trying to locate it, but there's no hint from BMW if this vehicle will reach full production. And I'd be curious what the color would be listed as for DMV registration, to say nothing of its inevitable use as a getaway car. Another AMD follow-up came to light Thursday as AMD's corporate VP David McAfee revealed in an interview with Tom's Hardware that they are taking another look at allowing Ryzen 5000 series CPUs to work with old 300 series motherboards. Motherboard manufacturers, including Asus and Gigabyte, started enabling support for A320 chipsets back in November, which set the community clamoring for expanded support on B350 and X370, which AMD apparently told vendors not to do. They might backtrack on that decision, or at least they're considering it, says McAfee, but it would undoubtedly come with complications due to the number of CPUs in the full Ryzen stack and limited BIOS ROM capacity. At this point, there are probably more enthusiasts looking to make use of older hardware than newbie 300 series buyers who might get confused by multiple BIOS versions though, so we'll see what AMD decides to do. It can be kind of nice when coalitions of tech giants allow for intercompatibility between devices by establishing industry-wide standards, but lately those standards have been failing us with convoluted naming schemes like USB 3.2 Gen 2 and HDMI 2.1, which might actually be HDMI 2.0, and Wi-Fi, unfortunately, is following the same path with this week's announcement of Wi-Fi 6 Release 2. And while Release 2's updates, like improved power usage and support for uplink multi-user MIMO, will make for faster and more reliable uploads, it also adds unneeded confusion to the standard that was supposed to be simplified to Wi-Fi 4, Wi-Fi 5, or Wi-Fi 6. And now we have Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, and Wi-Fi 6 Release 2. God help me, if they add a Gen 2 to the end of that, I think my head will explode. You don't have to make my head explode there, Joe, but you can if you want to. E3 is still many months away, typically happening in June, but they've already announced that they'll be doing things remotely again in 2022 due to COVID concerns, particularly the Omicron outbreak that is running rampant around the globe right now. Some have claimed that the event was actually canceled back in November and they're just announcing it now, but E3 is still well ahead of the curve making that call, as in-person events scheduled for spring 2022, such as GDC and PAX East, are still on for now. Antivirus software comes and goes, but Norton has been one of the longest lived. That appears to be changing though if the move to integrate Norton crypto into the software is any indication. Norton 360 has a Cryptominer embedded by default now, says Krebs on Security, and while it is opt-in to turn it on, it skims a 15% cut of mining profits and sends it to Norton, as a thank you for allowing them to use your hardware to mine, I suppose. The mining aspect of the software is apparently very difficult to remove from your system as well, and it just seems very, very off given that you'd expect antivirus software to detect and remove crypto mining apps from your PC rather than installing them directly. Speaking of crypto mining though, a word of wisdom. If you have a crypto mining farm and you live in Russia and it's winter, you should probably close the door if there's a storm blowing through. Keeping your PC hardware cooled is important, of course, but this might be taking it a little bit too far. Don't worry though, if there are GPUs under that snow, they'll probably still sell for double MSRP or more. Lightly used, minimal frost damage. But there you have it guys, tech news for the week, and thanks for joining me as we kick off 2022. I'm focusing on staying positive this year, so I'd be positively delighted if you left me some feedback, which is always welcome in the comment section down below. While you're down there, all the articles I talked about today are linked in the description if you're interested in further reading. You can also click the like button if you enjoyed this video, check out my store at paulshardware.net for a selection of excellent merchandise options, and subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more videos like this one in the future. Thanks again everyone, and we'll see you next week.